Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Harmony's edge, watching the blue-green world of Kepler 442b grow larger on the main screen. This planet had been a battlefield just 3 months ago. Now children from 2 different species played, together in the settlements below. The sight made her smile, even after all these years of diplomatic work. "Captain, we're receiving a message from the Vorthak delegation," said Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. His voice carried the calm tone that all human diplomats learned to use. Never show excitement, never show anger. Always stay peaceful. "Put them through," Elena replied, straightening her dark blue uniform. The Terran Confederation's diplomatic. Corps wore simple clothes, nothing fancy or threatening. They wanted other species to feel safe around humans. The crystal-like face of Ambassador Zekthon appeared on the screen. The Vorthak looked like living diamonds, their bodies reflecting light in beautiful patterns. But Elena knew that behind that beauty was a species that had been at war with their neighbors for over 300 years. "Captain Vasquez," Zekthon's voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The Zephyrian hive has agreed to your proposal. They will withdraw from the disputed mining stations." Elena felt relief wash over her. The Zephyrians were insect-like creatures that shared a group mind. They had been fighting the Vorthak over some asteroid fields rich in rare metals. Both species needed these metals badly, but neither wanted to share. It had taken Elena's team 6 weeks of careful talks to work out a solution. "That's wonderful news, Ambassador. And the Vorthak Council has approved the shared mining schedule we discussed?" "Yes, though some of our people still think we are being too generous." Zekthon's crystalline features shifted, showing what Elena had learned was disappointment. They say humans always favor our enemies. This was nothing new. Every species thought humans favored someone else. The truth was simpler. Humans just wanted everyone to stop fighting. They had been the galaxy's peacekeepers for 200 years now, ever since they first left Earth and found a universe full of war. "Ambassador, both your people and the Zephyrians will benefit from this agreement. War costs far more than sharing ever could." After ending the call, Elena walked to the observation deck. Space stretched out in all directions, filled with stars and the ships of a dozen different species. The Terran Confederation had embassy ships like hers in every major system. Human diplomats worked day and night to stop conflicts before they could grow into wars. Her second-in-command, Commander James Park, joined her at the window. He was young for his rank, only 35, but he had already helped solve 17 major disputes. "The Kepler situation is officially closed," he reported. "Both sides have signed the final agreements." "Good. That makes 43 successful mediations this year." Elena was proud of that number. Each success meant thousands, maybe millions of lives saved. "What's our next assignment?" "The Galactic Council wants us to head to the Rigel system. The hegemony of Krell is having some kind of dispute with the local governments there." Elena frowned. The Krell were different from most species. They were warriors by nature, believing that strength was the only thing that mattered. They had a large military and weren't shy about using it. Still, even the Krell usually listened to human mediators. They had to. The Galactic Council insisted that all disputes be handled peacefully first. "Any details on what the problem is?" "The Krell say some of the Rigel colonies aren't paying proper tribute. The colonies say the Krell are demanding too much." It sounded like a typical territorial dispute. Elena had handled dozens of them. The key was to find a solution that let both sides keep their dignity while avoiding bloodshed. The Harmony's Edge was one of humanity's newest diplomatic vessels. It carried no weapons, only the most advanced communication systems in the galaxy. The ship was designed to look peaceful and welcoming. Its hull was painted white with the blue and green symbol of the Terran Confederation, a tree with roots spreading across a planet. Elena's crew of 200 included diplomats, translators, cultural experts, and medics. They were the best humanity had to offer, trained from childhood in the arts of peace. Most had never seen a real weapon outside of a museum. As they traveled to Rigel, Elena reviewed the files on the Krell hegemony. They were a proud species, standing nearly 3 meters tall with thick gray skin and 4 arms. Their society was built around military service and honor. Every Krell citizen served in their armed forces for at least 20 years. The Krell had expanded their territory steadily over the past century, always staying just within the limits set by the Galactic Council. They never attacked without declaring war first, never broke truces, and always accepted human mediation when required. They were aggressive, but they followed the rules. That was what made them different from the real troublemakers. Pirates and raiders who attacked without warning, slavers who ignored all laws, criminal organizations that cared nothing for galactic peace. The Krell might be warlike, but they were civilized about it. Elena spent the 3-day journey studying both sides of the dispute. The Rigel colonies were mostly human settlements, farming communities that had been independent for over 50 years. The Krell claimed authority over them based on some old territorial agreements. The colonists said those agreements had expired. It looked like a simple legal matter. Elena was confident she could sort it out in a few days. She had handled much more complex situations before. The ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Rigel system. Elena was expecting to see the usual mix of civilian ships, cargo haulers, and maybe a few patrol vessels. Instead, her sensors showed something that made her blood run cold. "Captain," Lieutenant Torres called out, his voice tight with worry. "I'm reading over 200 Krell warships in the system." Elena rushed to the tactical display. The ships were arranged in perfect battle formation around the 3 inhabited planets of Rigel. These weren't patrol vessels or escorts. These were full military battleships, the kind the Krell used for serious warfare. "Are they responding to our diplomatic codes?" "Yes, ma'am. The Krell fleet commander wants to speak with you." The face that appeared on screen belonged to General Thakmor, one of the Krell's most famous military leaders. His 4 eyes were cold and calculating, his massive frame barely fitting in the command chair of his flagship. "Human diplomat," he said in accented but clear English. "You have arrived at an unfortunate time. This system is now under Krell protection. Your services are not needed." Elena kept her voice calm and diplomatic. "General, the Galactic Council has assigned us to mediate this dispute. Both sides have agreed to peaceful negotiations. The time for negotiations has passed. The colonies will submit to Krell authority or face the consequences. General, please, let us try to find a peaceful solution. Surely there's a way to resolve this without violence." Thakmor's expression didn't change. Humans always think there is another way. Sometimes force is the only language that works. You have 1 day to leave this system. The communication ended, leaving Elena staring at a blank screen. In 200 years of human diplomacy, this had never happened before. No species had ever simply refused to negotiate. She looked around at her crew. They were all staring at her, waiting for orders. These people had devoted their lives to peace. They had never faced a situation where someone simply wouldn't listen to reason. Elena made her decision. "Send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them we have a situation here that requires immediate attention." As her communications officer worked, Elena stared out at the Krell fleet. Something had changed in the galaxy. The rules that had kept the peace for 2 centuries were breaking down. She just hoped they could find a way to fix things before it was too late. Down on the planets below, 12 million human colonists went about their daily lives, unaware that their peaceful existence was about to come to an end. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called within hours of Elena's message. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime, the galaxy's diplomatic center. The huge room buzzed with worried voices speaking in dozens of languages. Ambassador Sarah Chen sat in the human delegation section, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had been Earth's chief diplomat for 15 years, and she had never seen the Council this upset. The Krell situation was unlike anything in recent history. "The chair recognizes Ambassador Chen of the Terran Confederation," announced the session leader, a tall being from the Altarian Republic. Sarah stood and walked to the center podium. Around her, hundreds of alien faces watched with interest. Some looked worried, others curious. A few seemed almost bored. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chambers. "Translation systems. We face a serious challenge to galactic peace. The Krell hegemony has refused all diplomatic contact regarding their actions in the Rigel system. They have told our mediators to leave and threaten the civilian populations of 3 worlds." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Zephyrian delegate, speaking through their hive's collective voice, said, "The Krell have always been aggressive. This is nothing new." "With respect," Sarah replied, "this is completely new. For 2 centuries, every species has accepted the requirement for diplomatic mediation before military action. The Krell are breaking that tradition." The Vorthak representative stood, their crystal body reflecting the chamber's lights. "Perhaps the humans are overreacting. The Krell have legitimate territorial claims in the Rigel system." Sarah felt a flash of anger but kept her voice level. "There are peaceful ways to resolve territorial disputes. That's why this council exists." For 3 hours the debate continued. Some delegates supported strong action against the Krell. Others suggested patience and understanding. A few openly questioned whether the human colonies in Rigel really deserved protection. Finally, after much discussion, the council voted on a resolution. It was weak, just a formal request for the Krell to accept mediation and a mild criticism of their aggressive stance. No real consequences, no military intervention, nothing that would actually stop what was happening. Sarah read the final vote, with growing disbelief. "This is all the council is willing to do?" A strongly worded letter. The Altarian session leader looked uncomfortable. "The council believes in patience and measured responses, Ambassador Chen. We cannot act hastily." That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters on Nexus Prime, feeling more frustrated than she had in years. She had devoted her life to diplomacy, to the belief that talking could solve any problem. But what happened when the other side simply refused to talk? Her secure communicator chimed with an urgent message from Captain Vasquez. The diplomatic ship was still in the Rigel system, trying desperately to find some way to restart negotiations. "Ambassador Chen," Elena's tired face appeared on the screen. "The situation here has gotten worse. The Krell have started jamming all communications between the planets and orbital space. No ships are being allowed to leave the system." "What about the colonial governments? Are they still resisting?" "For now, but General Thakmor has given them an ultimatum. They have 48 hours to surrender unconditionally or face what he calls the consequences of defiance." Sarah closed her eyes. "Any word from the Galactic Council fleet?" Elena's expression was grim. 3 ships, arriving in 6 days, against 200 Krell warships. After the call ended, Sarah stared out her window at the lights of Nexus Prime. This planet was the symbol of galactic peace, home to embassies from every civilized species. For 200 years, humans had helped build this system, believing that words were stronger than weapons. Now she was starting to wonder if they had been wrong. The next day brought devastating news. Sarah was meeting with the Rigelian ambassador when her aide burst into the room, face pale with shock. "Ma'am, we're getting reports from the Rigel system. The colonial capital on New Geneva, it's gone." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "The Krell fleet opened fire 3 hours ago. The entire surface of the planet has been..." Her aide struggled with the words. "Sterilized. No survivors detected." The Rigelian ambassador, a gentle herbivore species known for their peaceful nature, made a sound like a wounded animal. His people had family on New Geneva. Sarah's hands shook as she accessed the preliminary reports coming through the emergency channels. New Geneva had been home to 12 million people. It hosted the galaxy's largest university devoted to peace studies. Thousands of students from dozens of species had studied there, learning the arts of diplomacy and conflict resolution. The reports painted a picture that made Sarah sick to her stomach. The Krell hadn't just attacked military targets. They had systematically destroyed every city, every town, every settlement. Orbital bombardment had turned the entire planet into a smoking wasteland. The worst part was the timestamps. The attack had continued for 6 hours after all resistance had stopped. The Krell had kept firing long after there was nothing left to fight. More details came in throughout the day, each one worse than the last. The planet's children's hospitals had been specifically targeted. Refugee camps housing non-human civilians under human protection had been destroyed. Even the orbital research stations studying peaceful applications of Krell technology had been vaporized. Sarah called another emergency council session. This time the chamber was quieter, more somber. Even the most aggressive species seemed shocked by what had happened. 12 million civilians, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. 12 million people who never held a weapon, never threatened anyone. The Krell murdered them all because they wouldn't surrender their independence. The Krell ambassador sat in his section, unmoved. He was smaller than General Thakmor, but just as cold. When called upon to explain his people's actions, he stood calmly. The colonies were given clear warnings, he said in his mechanical translator voice. They chose defiance. The consequences were explained to them. Consequences? Sarah couldn't keep the anger out of her voice now. You're talking about genocide. We are talking about order. The strong rule, the weak submit. This is the natural way. Around the chamber, delegates shifted uncomfortably. Some looked horrified, others thoughtful. A few seemed to be considering whether the Krell might be right. The vote came that evening. Another resolution. This one slightly stronger. It condemned the Krell actions as excessive and called for appropriate measures to prevent future incidents. Still no real action. Still no consequences that might actually matter. Sarah watched the vote tally with growing despair. 47 civilizations, and only 12 were willing to do anything meaningful about genocide. The others were too afraid, too selfish, or too weak to act. After the session, she walked slowly back to the human embassy. The halls were filled with her staff, all looking as devastated as she felt. These people had devoted their lives to peace, and they had just watched it fail completely. Her deputy, Ambassador Martinez, met her at the door. His eyes were red, and she realized he had been crying. Sarah, he said quietly, I just got word from Earth. The president is recalling all diplomatic staff from non-essential posts. Every human mediator in the galaxy is being ordered home. Sarah nodded numbly. How many ongoing mediations will that affect? 67 active negotiations, including some that have been going on for years. She thought about all those conflicts, all those species that would go back to fighting without human peacekeepers to help them find solutions. More wars, more deaths, more suffering. But she also thought about the faces in the council chamber today. The boredom, the indifference, the cold calculation in their eyes as they watched her beg for justice for 12 million murdered civilians. Maybe it's time, she said finally. Time for what? Sarah looked out the window at the lights of Nexus Prime, at all the embassies and diplomatic installations that humans had helped build. For 2 centuries, her people had believed that peace was always possible, that every conflict could be resolved through patience and understanding. New Geneva had proven them wrong. Time for the galaxy to remember what humans were like before. We became diplomats. That night, Sarah sent a message to Earth. It was short, just a few lines, but it would change everything. For 200 years, humanity had chosen peace. Now, for the first time since they had left Earth, they were choosing something else. The age of human diplomacy was over. Admiral Sarah Kim stood in her garden on Luna, watching Earth rise over the horizon. She was 78 years old, and she had not worn a military uniform in 43 years. The tomatoes she was growing didn't care about her past. They just needed water and sunlight and patience. Her peaceful morning ended when 3 government officials appeared at her door. She recognized the youngest one, David Park, grandson of an old friend. He looked nervous. Admiral Kim, he said formally, the president needs to speak with you. It's urgent. Sarah set down her watering can and wiped her hands on her old gardening clothes. She knew why they were here. Everyone in the solar system had heard about New Geneva by now. 12 million dead, and the galaxy's response had been to write strongly. Worded letters. I'm retired, she said simply. Yes, ma'am. But the president would like you to consider coming back. The situation has changed. Sarah looked at the three officials in their crisp uniforms. Young people who had grown up in a galaxy where humans were peacekeepers, where disputes were settled with words instead of weapons. They had no idea what they were asking. Changed. How? David handed her a datapad. Every human diplomatic mission in the galaxy has been recalled. All mediation services have been suspended. 67 ongoing peace talks have been abandoned. Sarah scrolled through the reports. The Altarian Republic and the Centauri Alliance were already mobilizing fleets against each other. The Vegan trade wars were heating up again. 3 different species were claiming the same uninhabited star system, and without human mediators they were choosing to settle the dispute with battleships. The galaxy is falling apart, David continued. Wars are breaking out everywhere. The Galactic Council is in chaos. Good, Sarah said, surprising them. Maybe now they'll understand what peace was worth. She handed back the datapad and turned to go inside. I'm sorry you came all this way, but I'm done with war. Admiral, please, just hear what the president has to say. Something in David's voice made her stop. She looked at his face and saw something that reminded her of herself 40 years ago. Determination mixed with fear. 5 minutes, she said. The holographic projection showed President Martinez in his office. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past week. Sarah had known him since he was a junior senator, back when she was still in the military. Sarah, he said without preamble, I need you to come back. I'm retired, Roberto. I've been retired longer than these kids have been alive. The galaxy is burning. 17 new conflicts have started since we pulled our diplomats. The Krell are expanding into systems that nobody else can defend, and there are reports that other species are starting to copy their tactics. Sarah wasn't surprised. For 200 years, human peacekeepers had been the galaxy's immune system, stopping small conflicts before they could spread. Remove that protection, and the body politic would start to rot quickly. What exactly are you asking me to do? Take command of the Terran Defense Force. Help us figure out how to respond to this crisis. Sarah almost laughed. Roberto, the TDF, has about 50 ships and maybe 10,000 personnel. They're basically a coast guard. What am I supposed to do against species that have real militaries? I don't know. But you're the only person alive who remembers what humanity was like before we became diplomats. That was true. Sarah had been born in 2309, during the last years of the old Terran colonial navy. She had served during the final conflicts of human expansion, when Earth's children had still settled disputes the old-fashioned way. She had seen what humans could do when they stopped trying to be nice. The Krell have demanded access to all major human shipping routes, the president continued. They say it's for security purposes. They want us to hand over navigation data for every civilian cargo run in human space, and if we refuse, they'll take the routes by force. They have the ships to do it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her garden through the window, at the peaceful life she had built for herself. She thought about her late husband, who had died hoping their grandchildren would never have to see war. Send me the current force assessments, she said finally. All of them. Military, industrial, demographic. I want to know exactly what humanity has to work with. 3 days later, Sarah sat in her old office in Luna Command, reviewing files. That made her both amazed and worried. Humanity had changed in ways she had never imagined. The good news was that human space had grown enormously. There were now over 300 human-controlled star systems, with a total population of nearly 40 billion people. Human technology had advanced far beyond what she remembered, especially in areas like medicine, engineering, and space travel. The bad news was that almost none of it was military technology. Humanity had spent 2 centuries beating swords into plowshares so thoroughly that they had forgotten how to make swords at all. Commander Torres, her new aide, brought her another set of reports. He was young, maybe 35, and he had that eager look that reminded Sarah of herself at that age. Admiral, I have the industrial assessment you requested. Sarah opened the file and started reading. What she saw made her smile for the first time in days. Commander, do you know what humanity's largest industrial sector is? Shipbuilding, ma'am. We have the most advanced civilian fleet in the galaxy. And what do you think those shipyards are building right now? Torres looked confused. Cargo. Haulers, passenger ships, research vessels. The usual civilian stuff. Sarah turned her screen so he could see it. According to this report, we have over 800 major shipyards spread across human space. They can build a new starship every 18 hours on average. Yes, ma'am, but they're civilian ships. Commander, what's the difference between a cargo hauler and a troop transport? Understanding started to dawn on Torres's face. The cargo. Exactly. And what's the difference between a passenger liner and a hospital ship? The passengers. Sarah pulled up another file. We have the largest merchant marine in the galaxy, 30,000 deep space cargo ships, all with military-grade hyperspace drives because they need to travel fast to stay profitable. Every one of those ships can carry troops, supplies, or equipment. She opened another document. We have mining operations in over 200 systems, using some of the most advanced industrial equipment in known space. Equipment that can dig tunnels, move asteroids, or build installations on any planet we choose. Torres was starting to look excited. And our communication network? The most sophisticated in the galaxy. Every human world is connected by quantum entanglement communicators. We can coordinate operations across thousands of light years instantly. Sarah leaned back in her chair. For 2 centuries, humanity had been building the foundation for the most advanced military machine the galaxy had ever seen. They had just been calling it something else. Ma'am, Torres said carefully, what about weapons? We don't have any. Weapons manufacturing. Sarah smiled. Commander, we have matter conversion plants that can transform raw materials into any configuration we need. We have fabrication systems that can build anything from a coffee cup to a starship hull. Do you really think we can't figure out how to make weapons? The next week was a blur of activity. Sarah activated emergency protocols that had been gathering dust for over a century. Across human space, civilian industrial facilities received new orders. Cargo ships started loading different kinds of cargo. Research stations began working on projects that had nothing to do with peace. The transformation was faster than Sarah had dared to hope. Humanity's peaceful nature hadn't made them weak. It had made them incredibly efficient. When they decided to change direction, they did it with the same methodical thoroughness that had made them the galaxy's best diplomats. Sarah was reviewing production reports when Commander Torres rushed into her office. Admiral, we just received a message from the Krell Fleet Command. They're demanding immediate compliance with their shipping route requirements. What's their deadline? 72 hours. They say if we don't provide the navigation data by then, they'll begin security operations in human space. Sarah looked at the reports on her desk. Weapons production was ahead of schedule. Ship conversions were proceeding faster than planned. Training programs were turning civilian ship crews into military units at an unprecedented pace, but they weren't ready yet. They needed more time. Send a reply, she said. Tell them we need 2 weeks to compile the data they're requesting. Ma'am, they're not going to accept that. I know. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the construction yards where civilian ships were being converted for military use. But they've made the same mistake everyone else has made for the past 200 years. What's that? They think that because we chose peace, we're incapable of choosing anything else. Sarah turned back to Torres. Send the message. Let's see what they do when we tell them no. For 2 centuries, the galaxy had seen humanity as gentle peacekeepers, always willing to find a compromise, always ready to turn the other cheek. They had forgotten that humans had not always been that way. They were about to remember. General Thakmor stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human cargo convoy approach through the disputed shipping lane. 12 vessels, loaded with what appeared to be agricultural supplies and manufacturing equipment. Nothing unusual, except that they were flying through space that now belonged to the Krell hegemony. Signal the convoy, he ordered. Tell them to heave to for inspection. The lead human ship responded quickly. Captain Maria Santos appeared on the communication screen, looking calm and professional in her simple merchant uniform. General, Thakmore, we are operating under standard commercial agreements. These routes have been open to human shipping for over a century. Not anymore, Thakmore replied. By order of the Krell High Command, all traffic through this sector must be inspected and approved. Prepare to be boarded. Santos shook her head. I'm sorry, General, but we cannot comply with that order. We have delivery schedules to maintain. Thakmore felt a flash of anger. These humans still didn't understand. They still thought they could negotiate their way out of everything. Captain, you will comply or be destroyed. There will be no further warnings. Understood, Santos said, simply. We choose destruction. The communication ended, leaving Thakmore staring at a blank screen. In all his years of military service, no one had ever chosen death over surrender when faced with overwhelming force. He looked around at his bridge crew, all as confused as he was. Sir, his weapons officer asked. Your orders? Thakmore hesitated, for just a moment. Something felt wrong about this situation. But orders were orders, and the humans had been given their choice. Destroy them. The Krell battle fleet opened fire with enough energy to vaporize a small moon. Plasma bolts and particle beams tore through space toward the human convoy. For a few seconds, the area lit up like a new star. When the energy dissipated, there was nothing left. No wreckage, no debris, no signs that 12 ships had ever existed. Even the cargo containers were gone. Thakmore stared at empty space, feeling a chill run down his spine. Where are they? Unknown, sir, his sensor operator replied, voice shaking slightly. I'm reading no trace of the convoy, no wreckage, no energy signatures, nothing. That's impossible. Run a full spectrum scan. For an hour they searched. The convoy had simply vanished, as if it had never existed at all. Thakmore had destroyed hundreds of ships in his career, and there were always remains, always something left behind. This time, there was nothing. The report reached Admiral Sarah Kim 6 hours later. She read it while drinking her morning coffee, in her new office on Luna Command. According to Krell communications intercepts, a human convoy had been destroyed in the Altair shipping lanes. But according to human records, all 12 ships had arrived safely at their destination. Commander Torres, she called to her aide. Send a message to the Krell Fleet Command. Tell them we have no record of any ships being lost in the Altair system. Torres looked confused. Ma'am, but the convoy arrived on schedule, Sarah finished. All cargo delivered safely, no problems reported. Understanding dawned on Torres's face. Yes, ma'am, I'll send that message right away. Sarah returned to her reports. The Krell weren't the only ones causing problems. Over the past month, 17 different species had broken treaties that humans had mediated. Trade agreements were being violated, territorial boundaries were being ignored, and peaceful settlements were being attacked. For 200 years, these agreements had held because everyone knew that humans would notice if they were broken. Human diplomats had monitored compliance, investigated violations, and worked to fix problems before they became wars. Now there were no human diplomats, and certain species were discovering that without human oversight, they could do whatever they wanted. Or so they thought. The Vorthak were the first to learn otherwise. They had signed a mining rights agreement with the Bellatrix colonies 5 years ago, carefully mediated by human negotiators. The deal gave the Vorthak access to rare crystal formations in exchange for advanced technology transfers. Last month, the Vorthak had stopped sending the agreed-upon technology while continuing to strip mine the crystals. The Bellatrix colonists had complained to the Galactic Council, but without human mediators there was no one to enforce the agreement. So the Vorthak kept mining, assuming there would be no consequences. They were wrong. The first crystal harvester simply stopped working. The massive machine, larger than a city block, went silent in the middle of an extraction operation. Vorthak engineers swarmed over it, but they couldn't find anything wrong. The power systems were fine, the controls responded normally, but the harvester wouldn't move. Then the second harvester failed, then the third. Within a week, every piece of Vorthak mining equipment on Bellatrix had mysteriously stopped functioning. Ambassador Zekthon called an emergency meeting with the Galactic Council, his crystalline features flashing with anger. "This is sabotage. Someone is attacking our lawful operations." The council investigated, but they found nothing. No signs of tampering, no evidence of outside interference. The equipment had simply failed, all at once, for no apparent reason. The Vorthak brought in new machines, the most advanced models their technology could produce. These lasted exactly 3 days before they too fell silent. In desperation, Zekthon reached out to human technical experts. Surely the diplomatic withdrawal didn't extend to commercial consulting services. He received a polite reply from the Terran Technical Exchange. "We regret that we are currently unable to provide support for operations that violate existing treaty obligations. We recommend reviewing the Bellatrix Mining Agreement of 2382 for guidance on resolving this matter." The message was signed by a low-level bureaucrat and included a copy of the original mining treaty, with the relevant sections highlighted in red. Meanwhile, other species were learning similar lessons. The Rigelian pirates who had been raiding peaceful shipping lanes suddenly found their ships suffering from cascading system failures whenever they approached a potential target. The Centauri military, which had been intimidating civilian populations in disputed territories, discovered that their mighty battleships had a tendency to lose life support systems at inconvenient moments. None of these incidents could be traced to human action. The equipment failures looked random. The system malfunctions appeared to be natural phenomena. But the pattern was becoming clear to anyone who cared to look. Species that had honored their human-mediated agreements were experiencing no problems at all. Species that had broken those agreements were finding that their technology had become mysteriously unreliable. The Altarian Republic was one of the few civilizations that had spoken out against the New Geneva massacre. Their ships traveled safely through space, their equipment functioned perfectly, and their trade routes remained secure. When Altarian merchants encountered pirates or raiders, those criminal ships had a tendency to suffer sudden and catastrophic engine failures. The pattern was so obvious that even the Galactic Council couldn't ignore it. But when they demanded an explanation from the Terran Confederation, they received only diplomatic form letters referring them to the appropriate trade authorities. General Thakmor was reviewing reports of equipment failures throughout Krell space when his aide brought him another disturbing update. "Sir, we've lost contact with the patrol fleet in the Vega system." "Lost contact how?" "Unknown, sir. They were conducting a routine patrol when their communications went silent. We sent a reconnaissance ship to investigate, but it hasn't reported back either." Thakmor felt that chill again, the same one he had experienced when the human convoy vanished. "How many ships?" 16, sir, including the heavy cruiser Dominance." 16 ships, simply gone. No distress signals, no battle reports, no wreckage. It was as if space itself was swallowing Krell vessels. "Double all patrols," Thakmor ordered. "I want constant communication checks every 10 minutes. But the disappearances continued. 3 ships here, 5 ships there, sometimes entire squadrons at once. The Krell fleet was melting away like ice in summer, and no one could explain how or why. The other species were beginning to notice too. Krell ships that had seemed so threatening just weeks ago were becoming harder and harder to find. The mighty hegemony that had terrorized the galaxy was shrinking back to its core systems, its fleets vanishing into empty space. Ambassador Sarah Chen watched the reports from her new office on Earth. She had been recalled from Nexus Prime along with all other human diplomats, but she kept track of galactic affairs through intelligence channels. The transformation was remarkable. In just 2 months, the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted completely. The aggressive species that had counted on human patience and forgiveness were discovering that patience had limits. Her secure communicator chimed with a call from Admiral Kim. Sarah answered, curious to hear how the military side of operations was proceeding. "Ambassador," Kim said without preamble, "we've received a formal request from the Galactic Council. They want to reopen diplomatic negotiations." "What kind of negotiations?" "They want us to resume our mediation services. Apparently the galaxy is becoming unstable without human peacekeepers. Sarah almost laughed. After they ignored the genocide of 12 million, 1 year after the destruction of New Geneva, the Galactic Council chamber on Nexus Prime was a very different place. Where once 47 species had gathered in noisy debate, now only 12 representatives sat in the vast space. The empty sections served as a reminder of how much the galaxy had changed. Admiral Sarah Kim walked slowly to the center podium, her simple gray uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial dress that had once filled this chamber. She was no longer the retired gardener from Luna. She was the commanding officer of the Terran Enforcement Corps, the new power that had reshaped galactic civilization. Behind her walked a small group of aides, including Commander Torres, who now carried the rank of captain. His job was to document everything that happened here for the historical record. The remaining council members watched her approach with expressions ranging from respectful fear to genuine gratitude. Sarah recognized most of them, species that had honored their treaty obligations, that had spoken out against genocide, or that had simply minded their own business instead of encouraging aggression. Honored delegates, Sarah began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's translation systems. 1 year ago, this council watched the systematic murder of 12 million civilians and responded with strongly worded letters. Today we gather to discuss the consequences of that choice. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. It showed a map of the galaxy, with different regions marked in various colors. The Krell hegemony, she said, highlighting a small section of space, once controlled over 200 star systems. They now control exactly one, their homeworld of Krell Prime. Their military has been reduced from 3,000 ships to 0. Their government consists of the handful of leaders we have chosen not to arrest for crimes against sapient life. Murmurs rippled through the small audience. The Altarian representative, one of humanity's few consistent allies, raised a tentacle. Admiral, what is the current status of the Krell population? Fed, housed, and under protective custody, Sarah replied. Their homeworld is blockaded to prevent any attempts to rebuild their military. But civilian ships are allowed to bring food and medical supplies. We are not interested in genocide, even against genocidal species. She changed the display to show another region of space. The Vorthak Confederacy, which violated the Bellatrix mining accords, has had its mining capabilities permanently disabled. They are free to pursue other economic activities, but they will never again be able to extract resources from worlds that do not belong to them. The Vorthak had learned this lesson the hard way. Every piece of mining equipment they built, no matter how advanced or well protected, would suffer mysterious failures within days of activation. Their economy had collapsed, but their people were still alive. The Centauri Empire, which had been expanding into neutral space in violation of the Treaty of Proxima, has been reduced to its core systems. The Rigelian pirate fleets have been eliminated entirely. 17 other species that chose aggression over negotiation have faced similar consequences. Sarah paused, letting the scope of the transformation sink in. In 1 year, humanity had restructured the galaxy's balance of power more thoroughly than 2 centuries of diplomacy had managed. However, she continued, species that honored their agreements, that treated others with respect, or that simply refrained from attacking civilians, have been left in peace. Indeed, many have prospered under the new order. This was true. The Altarian Republic had expanded its territory significantly, filling the vacuum left by more aggressive neighbors. The peaceful farming worlds of the Bellatrix colonies were experiencing unprecedented prosperity, as trade routes became safer than they had been in generations. Ambassador Veltar of the Altarian Republic stood to speak. Her species looked somewhat like graceful octopi, with tentacles that could manipulate tools with incredible precision. They had been among humanity's most consistent allies. Admiral Kim, she said, my people are grateful for the protection we have received, but many of us wonder, what comes next? Will humanity simply rule the galaxy through force? It was a fair question, and one that Sarah had been expecting. She deactivated the holographic display and faced the assembled delegates directly. Humanity never wanted to rule anything, she said. For 200 years we tried to help you rule yourselves. We offered mediation, negotiation, and peaceful resolution to every conflict. We asked for nothing in return except that you honor the agreements you made. She gestured to the empty seats around them. Those species chose to interpret our peaceful nature as weakness. They chose to break their promises to attack civilians and to ignore the very principles that held this civilization together. They forced us to choose between watching the galaxy burn and taking action to stop it. Captain Torres stepped forward with a data pad. Sarah glanced at it and nodded. As of today, 43 species that once held seats in this council have been either eliminated entirely or reduced to single-system entities under Terran oversight. Their former territories have been distributed among species that demonstrated responsible behavior. The Bellatrix representative, a gentle herbivore whose people had been among the most frequent victims of aggression, spoke up. What assurance do we have that humanity will not become the same kind of threat that you eliminated? Sarah smiled, and for the first time in months it was a genuinely warm expression. Because we are still the same people who spent 2 centuries trying to make peace work. The only thing that has changed is our willingness to tolerate those who refuse to be peaceful. She walked to one of the empty sections of the chamber, running her hand along a vacant seat. Every species that was removed from this council was given multiple opportunities to change course. The Krell were warned dozens of times about their increasingly aggressive behavior. The Vorthak were repeatedly asked to honor their mining agreements. We spent decades trying to reform the pirate fleets through diplomatic channels. Sarah turned back to face the remaining delegates. When diplomacy failed, we tried economic pressure. When that failed, we tried isolation. When that failed, we tried public condemnation. Only when every peaceful option had been exhausted did we resort to force. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Everyone present understood the implications. Humanity had not become a tyrannical empire. They had become something far more dangerous. They had become the galaxy's judge and jury, deciding which species deserved to survive based on their behavior. So what happens now? Asked the representative from the Tau Ceti Alliance, a confederation of mining worlds that had always maintained strict neutrality. Sarah walked back to the central podium. Now we rebuild. The galaxy has lost dozens of aggressive civilizations, but it has gained something more valuable: stability. For the first time in recorded history, civilian shipping can travel safely through any system. Pirates and raiders have been eliminated. Territorial disputes are being resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. She activated another holographic display, this one showing trade routes and economic data. Galactic commerce has increased by 300% in the past year. Medical supplies reach every world that needs them. Food shipments arrive on schedule. Children grow up without fear of invasion or bombardment. It was an impressive achievement, but Sarah could see the unease in some faces. Peace enforced by an overwhelming military power was still peace, but it came at a cost that many found uncomfortable. I know what some of you are thinking, Sarah said. You're wondering if humanity has simply replaced one set of tyrants with another. You're worried about what happens if we decide that your species is behaving badly. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Those are valid concerns. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why humanity will not be establishing a permanent galactic government. This surprised everyone. Captain Torres looked up from his notes, clearly hearing this for the first time. Instead, Sarah continued, we are implementing a new system. The Terran Enforcement Corps will maintain a presence in key systems to deter aggression, but day-to-day governance will remain with local governments. Trade will be free and open to all peaceful species. Scientific cooperation will be encouraged. She gestured to the remaining delegates. This council will be reformed with representatives from every species that demonstrates responsible behavior. Humanity will hold a permanent seat, but we will not hold a majority. Decisions will be made by consensus whenever possible. The Altarian representative raised a tentacle again. And if someone breaks the peace? If a new aggressive species emerges? Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Then they will be dealt with the same way we dealt with the Krell, quickly, thoroughly, and permanently. The session continued for several more hours, working out the details of the new galactic order. It was a strange kind of democracy, one where certain behaviors were simply not tolerated, where aggression was met with swift and overwhelming force. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Captain Torres approached Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "Admiral, do you think this will work? Can peace really be maintained through the threat of force?"